Okay, so this will be a quick introduction to layers in Gimp. It's one of the most important things you need to learn for this program. Definitely something that everyone should know, and definitely something you need to know if you're going to be doing a lot of work in this program. So I'll go ahead and start off with some of the basics here, which is just the hierarchy of how layers work. First of all, I'd like to address how big these preview sizes are over here. If you want them a little bit larger, they're probably set to a little bit smaller as default. Go ahead and click this tab here, go to tab size, and then, or preview size, my bad, and then one of these last three right here should do just fine. So you'll notice over here in the layers tab, which should be one of the defaults, my GIMP may look a little bit different than yours, but you should be able to find a tab that's pretty similar to this. You'll notice a few icons here, one being the eye icon, which what that does is lets you know if that layer is visible or not. So the eye means yes it is, and the unclicked eye means that it's not. So you'll notice over here you can see it, but it's not showing up over here. All you have to do usually is just click that right there. So I have a few more examples down here that I'll get to in a minute for some other things. So you'll notice here that these are the only two I have on. So the normal mode is what you'll pretty much use for everything, unless you're trying to overlay certain colors or something like that, which I'll go ahead and get to right now. So if you set the mode to overlay, what that does is takes the color of whatever layer you have and kind of disperses it down onto the layer below it. So you'll notice here, once I bring up this brick layer, you'll notice here that it's a little bit opaque and you can still see the brick layer or the brick texture underneath it. If you set this back to normal, it goes back to its normal look here. So the overlay is really one of the bigger ones that you use for a lot of texturing. If you're trying to place a texture down onto a color or something, it can also pull off a pretty decent looking graffiti effect here, especially if you've got a bunch of blank colors. You would add some dripping paint and maybe some graffiti looking text as well. Something you would definitely want to do is learn bump mapping, and that helps really sell the effect of this is actually spray painted onto the wall. But that's something we can cover in a future tutorial. And another thing is, you'll see here that even though this layer's on and this one all the way down here is on, it still applies no matter how many layers you have over here. Even if I turn on some of these other ones here, it'll apply to whatever I turn it on to. So that's something very important to remember. If you've got something that's visible on one layer and it's set to overlay, it'll go down to the layer that is blocking it. So this one right here, now it wouldn't be on this brick layer over here because this one is blocking it. It only applies to the foremost layer, if that makes sense. There's plenty of layer modes here. Each one has its own purpose, but a lot of them kind of serve the same purpose. So you'll see overlay here. I'll do it with a blue star as well, just so you can see a difference here. You've got the overlay, you've got the soft light. Literally almost no difference between those two, at least in this example. But hard light kind of goes back to normal. So it really helps to mess around with these or look up specifically what they do. Each one has 100 purposes probably, especially if you mess with the opacity as you do it. So say we take this blue one for instance and then turn that down. That almost gives the same effect as the overlay, but it is a little different once you get to messing with it. Another thing you can do is the hue option, which basically colors everything that has a color on a layer as the color you have it. So you'll notice here that the whites in between the bricks are now a little bit red, but the whites on this one are not. So, like I mentioned, each one has its own thing. It doesn't apply a color to white because it's technically not a color. It just takes the hue value of the one you applied to it. Again, it really helps if you mess around with those, because each one has its own purpose, but each one can serve multiple purposes, if that makes sense. So we'll go ahead and move on down to another really important kind of thing here, kind of going back to the hierarchies. You'll notice here there's a happy old man, but he's not in the frame like you'd think he would be. Now, one thing you could do is just move this layer up. All you have to do that is just click and then drag it up, and then you'll notice now that the layer is on the top of our image, so that he is inside the frame. Well, what you'll have to do to achieve that is, whenever I had this image originally, it had a block of white within this, which you'll now see over here in the preview window. What I did to remove that was, there's many ways you can do it, and a lot of ways you should and shouldn't do with different images, but the simplest one you can do is the fuzzy select tool here. Looks like a little magic wand, and what it tries to do is select like colors. So white, for example, in a lot of images like these, all you have to do is just click in this white, and then you'll see these little, what I call marching ants, around your selection, and all you would have to do is hit delete. Now, if you have a really high resolution image, that makes it really easy for you because you don't really have any edges as far as where the white went. With lower resolution images, it's kind of messy, and there's better ways of doing that. And then you could also have this old man here, and a way that a lot of people do it, which is really inefficient, would be to take the eraser tool and kind of just go around and erase it as you need to around here, which it does work, but it's a little messy, like once you get down in here, like so, which it's a really quick and easy effect, but not nearly as good as if you just had to drag one layer up. So, just something to remember, how the stacking of these layers works, that compared to this right here. You'll see it's kind of blurred here compared to if I just had the frame on top, whereas is a crisper image down here. And then another thing I'd like to go over is using layers to cut other layers. What you can do there is, say we have our blue star, which I still have that set to hue, so set that to normal. So say you wanted to cut a star shape out of this block. There's a few ways you could do it by going along this star, tracing it with the point select tool, like so. And this is just a rough cutout. You would probably zoom in if this was the method you were using. And you actually don't have to draw a line here. It auto-connects them as closely as it can with a straight line. So all you would have to do here is just hit enter. And then what you would do is go back down to your black layer and hit delete. And you wouldn't be able to see it immediately because your blue star is still there. So what you would want to do is now turn off your blue star. And you can see here that there's a lot of white lines that go around it. It's because you didn't cut it accurately using that point select tool. So an easier and much better way of doing that would be to right click on this layer here and hit alpha to selection. And what that does is everything that is transparent, it will ignore. And everything that's an actual color, it will select. So if you hit alpha to selection, it will skip all of the transparency that was on that layer here within these layer boundaries. And it will only select every pixel that is actually a color. So that makes it really easy. All you have to do now is move down from this layer and click on this one, just a regular left click, and then hit delete. And then you can select none to get rid of those marching ants, take off the blue star layer, and now you have a perfect star cutout. Now, say what if you wanted to duplicate this star out of a layer like this? Well, I'll teach you about layer inversion or selection inversion. What you need to do there is alpha to selection this here, and then hit select and invert. Now what that does is your current selection is everything that's inside these marching ants. What you're now doing is selecting everything that's not these things inside the marching ants. So if you select invert, it's now selected everything over here instead. So you can now go back down to your other layer here, your black box layer, and hit delete. And what that does is it will leave a black star. So that's really useful for if you have, say, some curves you're trying to cut out or copy or something like that, and you're just trying to move it around without really affecting some other layers. It has multiple purposes, and it's a very useful technique to use. This is a really basic intro, and it really helps to go ahead and learn all of these layer modes here, because they're very useful for adding different colors and different textures and darknesses and lightnesses and all of these great things to your different images here. One thing you could use this for is, say, turn that off. Say you wanted to make this man's eyes a reddish color. What you could do is go ahead and create a new layer here. Make sure transparency is selected. Go ahead and drag this to where your man layer is and drag it above that layer. So make sure your transparent new layer is above this one. Go ahead and select the color you would want to change the eyes to. So we'll select a dark red here. Go ahead and change our brush and scale it down a little bit. A little bit more. And then just cover over the pupil of the eye here. And you'll notice some went over on the eyelid, which a good way to determine that would be to turn down the opacity of that layer so you can see through it a little bit, and then zoom in, and then you can erase all of the parts that got on the eyelid here, or are anywhere that you really don't want them, and just go ahead and erase that. That was a bad job right there. And then you can turn that back to up to full opacity, and then you can try to overlay it, which it leaves a little bit of a rough edge, and this is just a very simple technique just to show you kind of what it can do. Or you can set that to hue, and that kind of grays out the eyes rather than keep them as blue, just because it's kind of a dull red and doesn't mix well with the color that was originally there. So for this one you might want to do probably an overlay, and then just soften up the edges of that circle here using the fuzzy eraser tool. Something along those lines. And again, that's a really basic, just showing you an implication that you can do, and then kind of zoom out, and then you'll notice here, as long as you're not too up close, it now looks like he has somewhat of red eyes. So again, this is just a really basic intro, mainly just showing off the hierarchies, just how this is your upper layer, your upmost layer. It will always be on the foreground, and these down here are always in the back, as furthest back as you can get. And it's really easy to move them around and cut things out from one image to another. And I hope this helped you. If not, leave me a comment below telling me exactly what you need help with, and I'll get back to you soon.